And welcome back to the hot lap. Coming up, Verstappen tells us to go suck an egg. Hamilton's with Mercedes problems. Logan Sargent again whoops a daisy. And AlphaTauri announced their new drivers, and we're going to take a look at the grid. But first, but not least, let's say, the championship leader, as we know, Verstappen, was in absolute fine form in qualifying. Congratulations on what was an amazing pole position. He ended up going out and obviously beating his own very much benchmark by over a tenth to best Oscar Piastri by, well, just over half a second, nearly 0.6 of a second. So their renewed vigour after Singapore that weekend, which they didn't really do too well, and where Verstappen was knocked out by rookie Liam Lawson. But he had an interesting quote. Verstappen reckoned that this has had to put to bed rumblings that he was fired up for, with the technical directive slowing them down. Yes, Verstappen here has, I think he's all told us to go suck an egg, so to speak. I mean, his actual quote was, "We had a bad weekend, of course. Then people start talking about, it's all because of the technical directives. I think they can go suck an egg." And that's when he replied to a question from motorsport.com asking if his poll underlined a statement of intent. He said, "From my side, I was just very fired up to have a good weekend here and make sure we were strong." And he joked that Singapore, it didn't happen, and that Red Bull has suffered zero recurrences of its issues at the Marina Bay when compared to, obviously, Suzuka. So a really, really good pole lap, albeit, yes, it isn't the best car. I think Corin Chandler said it was one of the, an amazing qualifying lap, which I don't know to go that far, because yes, he is in the best car, and it was a lap where I don't want to say he's under pressure, because all laps you're under a certain element of pressure, but it wasn't under pressure as in he had to steal the pole off somebody else. So in terms of that kind of a pressure cooker environment, it really wasn't, was it? But still, well done to Verstappen, and let's be fair, Verstappen has done a lot better than, a certain Lewis Hamilton, who, you've got to feel for Mercedes. Looking really good in Singapore. Potentially, one of the two Mercedes drivers could have won it. And qualifying came, and they're over a second off the pace. We're going to get into the grid in a bit, but Hamilton urges Mercedes to fix their 100% concept issue after Japan quali struggled. This is from Jamie Woodhouse from PlanetF1.com. So Hamilton has complained about a lack of rear. He says basically they're good at the front, they're not too good at the rear of that Mercedes W14. And this is a feature which he says must be changed, pointing to McLaren as proof of what, well, any team can do. They put here Red Bull. Now, as we know, Verstappen returned to being in the class of one, let's say, at Japanese Grand Prix qualifying, and it was the McLaren MCL60 which established the best of the rest. And remember, this is a McLaren that was one of the slowest cars at the beginning of the year. So as we know, the wonderful Oscar Piastri will start P2 and Lando Norris P3 ahead of the Ferraris, and Verstappen's teammate Sergio Perez, with Hamilton forced to settle for P7 alongside George Russell. Now, Hamilton ending Q3, as we mentioned, a second off the pace at Suzuka and half a second down on Piastri, which the concerning thing is there, it's a customer team. It's the Mercedes customer team. So what is going wrong for Mercedes? Hamilton said yesterday was a bad day, he told Sky. Each weekend, out of the 3 days, there was at least one bad day. He went on to say that the balance didn't feel great yesterday. We made some great changes, good work overnight, and the car has felt generally really nice today. It's been nice to drive through FP3, so I feel much more confident. Yesterday we were talking about Hamilton not feeling confident at all. And then Hamilton said, and then qualifying, I was giving everything. But that 0.7 deficit that we have in Sector 1, it's just all rear end. Our car has loads on the front and not as much as we need on the rear. And so we're really a long way down on that. And for me, that's clearly concept. It's 100% clear that's concept, and we've got to make sure we change that for next year, which we hopefully will. And he's mentioned it's a steep gap that we have to close next year, but he was using basically Aston Martin's example of how good they came. But if you think Hamilton's qualifying wasn't too great, feel for this guy here, Logan Sargent. I mean, this is from WTF F1 by Harry Eagleton. And it starts basically saying you have to feel sorry for this guy. There's some pace there, a good Friday practice session here, but Williams driver Logan Sargent just can't seem to string a solid weekend together. And to make matters worse, it's slowly getting to him. Now, following a crash during Q1, where he kind of just destroyed his car, Sargent sounds like he's having a bad time trying to understand how to put a smooth weekend together. I'd say the tricky part is just knowing I have the pace, but these little mistakes are obviously causing me issues. He went on to say, at the end of the day, I'm not trying to put it in the wall. Not a lot I can say other than, I'm doing my best, but I keep crossing the line. We all know that mindset and confidence play a huge role in the life of a driver, the article said. And it's transparent and infectious when we see a driver who's totally on top of things. They ooze self-belief. But for Sargent, it's quite the opposite. I'm just worried, he says, about getting through each race the best I can. Is it time for Williams to start considering other drivers? I mean, you've seen how good Liam Lawson is when he's come into Formula One. He's done a handful of races. He hasn't made the mistakes that Logan Sargent has made. He hasn't made the mistakes that even a slightly more experienced Lance Stroll, given at some point Lance Stroll had the second best car in Formula One, has made. It's going to be interesting. But speaking on the driver front, big announcement. Yuki Tsunoda and Daniel Ricciardo, look at them smiling here, will form AlphaTauri's race lineup for 2024 with Liam Lawson. And this is, I think, controversial maybe, or some people might find it a bit sad. Yeah, Liam Lawson not really having much to do with AlphaTauri going forward for next year, other than being, potentially the Red Bull reserve driver. Now, as we know, Tsunoda made his debut in 2021, and he really impressed the team with his undoubtful natural talent and constant improvement and ability to integrate with the team. And he'd been partnered by Daniel Ricciardo, who's currently on the sidelines with a broken hand when he raced for them in Hungary and Belgium before the summer break. But both Ricciardo and Tsunoda, they are it's going to be a really interesting year for them next year, and in particular when Daniel Ricciardo come back. I think only one of them potentially will survive after 2024. It's going to be a fight for either to be in the lead Red Bull team or to be kept on by AlphaTauri, because both of them have had, at that point, I think, lots of chances. So it's going to be really, really interesting to see who is going, who's basically going to win. So, who would I tip? I don't know. My head says Tsunoda, my heart says Ricciardo, but I guess we're gonna have to see, aren't we? We're gonna have to see. So, qualifying, Max Verstappen on pole, but let's go all the way into the back of the grid, and it's Logan Sargent who started last. Zhou as well didn't do particularly well, and then we've got Hulkenberg. I mean, both the Haas Ferraris in 18th and 15th, not particularly very good, especially when you look at Singapore. And I kind of felt with people having trouble, it is quite a high tyre deg. So, but the temperatures were cooling, and when the temperatures are cooling, because that Haas does like to heat its tyres up, you get grip a lot quicker. But they are the hardest tyres of the year here. So it's going to be interesting to see how they go for the race. But in amongst them, in between the two Haas drivers, you've got Lance Stroll in the Aston Martin. Oh dear. Yeah, it's becoming now a stark record, really. My opinions on the wonderful Lance Stroll. It's that if they want to be a serious team, put someone else in the car. I know that's a bit harsh, but hey, Valtteri Bottas 16th. So you kind of guess maybe that's the fastest the Alfa Romeo could go. Esteban Ocon in 14th and 12th for Pierre Gasly. Disappointing maybe for Alpine Renault. Not so good here. Man, they've been really struggling, really, I think. They looked better at the beginning of the season, didn't they? When you look at the first half of the year, they looked solid, especially with that podium, for example, in Monaco. And Albon, 13th between them. I guess that's about as good as you could really expect. Liam Lawson, 11th, just about kicked out. And he did use an extra set of softs in the earlier Q1 session, which I think people have suggested that may have hurt him. But Fernando Alonso in, well, basically 10th. Now, when we look at him, a 1:30.560, he did in the end to get pole. But he was, I mean, to be fair, Alonso was only up 10th faster than Lance Stroll, who finished 17th when in the first qualifying session. But still, Fernando Alonso embarrassing again Lance Stroll. Tsunoda, well done. Newly signed Tsunoda, 9th for his home Grand Prix. Congratulations there. Then we've got the Mercedes on row 4, 7th and 8th. But I think Lewis Hamilton will be slightly happy because he was talking about his qualifying form after the summer break, mentioning the fact that he's, you know, he has not really beaten George Russell. George seems to be a lot better on setup, and he's good, and he's gone his way on setup. So to out-qualify George, I think he's got to be a bit happy at that. That's the most they can really do. And at one point, it looked even worse. But in Q2, Hamilton really did pull out a fairly decent time right at the end to go. I think so. You know, to go not only a few tenths away from the fastest at the time, albeit the wonderful Verstappen in Q2 when Hamilton did that out of the blue time. Was pretty much on used soft tyres. Such was his dominance. But Carlos Sainz 6th, not as good as Leclerc has. I mean, Leclerc's kind of got his momentum back. Maybe he's about 3 tenths off with Perez in 5th. Yeah, Perez. Well, once again, kind of like Lance Stroll. Is Perez really that slow? Are those cars really, really even? And when they say even, I mean like 100% even. I don't know. I still can't see Perez being that much slower than Max. Like, a massive gap. If he is, why has he been signed for 2024? Why is he there for next year? Because if this was a closer championship, if that Red Bull didn't have the pace, the Constructors' Championship next year, if it is closer, it's going to be in doubt. And it's going to be Perez that is really going to be the lackluster one there when you compare to all the other teammates. Because all of them are fairly close to each other. When you look at the span of a season, Hamilton, Russell, Sainz, Leclerc, Norris, Piastri, they're all quite close. And this is the biggest gap here you've got between the two, between the bigwigs. The second biggest gap probably is Alonso, Stroll. That may well even be the biggest, I think, when you look at all the maths, but it's definitely one of those two. So, Leclerc 4th, getting his mojo back, but Lando Norris in 3rd, just pipped to the post by Oscar Piastri. We're talking hundredths. I mean, it was really close between 2nd, 3rd and 4th. But yeah, Oscar Piastri, his first proper front row. Well done, and well done. Apparently, Zach Brown's trying to get his mum to come to the track. But Max Verstappen on pole, a really, really good lap. I don't think amazing, as I mentioned, but a really, really good lap. One of his best laps of the year. Not of his career. I think he's done better qualifying. I think he's done better qualifying laps in terms of that under a lot more pressure. But well done, Max. That Red Bull looks unbeatable in his hands. No doubt he's definitely favourite for the race unless something bizarre happens. I do think the Mercedes drivers may have an extra hard, so the McLaren drivers may have as well going into the race. But they do believe it's going to be potentially a 2-stop race because of all that degradation there. At least that's what's coming from Pirelli. So it's going to be interesting. Max Verstappen to win, and I do think we will have a double McLaren podium, barring something quite a disaster really for McLaren. I do feel that they're kind of on the pace of Ferrari, if not a slight advantage. I feel, especially when you look at their qualifying, but a lot is going to be dependent on that start. Could Oscar Piastri lead into the first corner? I mean, they were giving him massive cheers, weren't they? He was definitely the most cheered guy when they did the qualifying top 3. But, yeah, Oscar Piastri, congratulations. Him and Max, easily the men are qualifying. Mercedes looking at really a bit lackluster out of the big ones. And Alonso, potentially a painful fight for that, for that last point. You'd like to think he'll at least get ahead of Tsunoda and minimum finish 9th. But this has been the Hot Lap. Stay tuned. Join us again when we will be looking at the race tomorrow. Speak to you soon.